At 57 years of age, I found out I had arteries of a 73-year-old. I thought I was Mr. Healthy. When I found out I had plaque, I was devastated. Most people, including doctors, believe that the leading cause of heart attacks is LDL cholesterol. And I'm telling you, it's just wrong. So, today we're going to talk about my story, how I reversed my plaque, and how quitting sugar was the most impactful thing I did. At the end of this video, you'll have an abbreviated version of my 16-year journey on plaque reversal, during which you'll understand why quitting sugar is fundamental to reversing plaque. And we'll talk about what do we mean by quitting sugar. Also, I'll explain to you something about arterial plaque calcification. I'm sure you haven't heard it anywhere else, and that's weird because it's fundamental to understanding what arterial plaque reversal actually means. When you actually start looking at this more deeply and looking at what other people are saying, you'll see that the guys that are out practicing may be too busy to learn some things. And they say things like plaque reversal's impossible. But you go to some of the bigger academic centers like Harvard, and they say, oh, no, plaque reversal's not impossible at all. In fact, Harvard's going more and more and more in our direction, talking about LDL being a myth, talking about inflammation being a big issue. But we'll cover that today. Hey, Sus, you ready to get started? Gilbert, can you hear Jesus?
I'm sorry.
There you go.
You muted me, right? So you're just trying to embarrass me in front of everybody, just right from the get-go.
I didn't think you were you figured that out quickly, didn't you?
And let me tell you, we're gonna go to the topic. Just bear with me for a second. I really loved your introduction with the glasses. It was like Brewer, Ford Brewer. That was amazing.
Oh, that's silly. As I told you, I'm experimenting with blue light glasses, and you and I are both a little bit skeptical about the evidence behind blue light glasses, but like so many things, I'm curious, so I'm going to try it.
Well, I'm more skeptical than you are. Let's go to talk about plaque. People don't want to hear about blue light today. Right there, what you have on the screen, you guys, is the CIMT from Dr. Brewer. Those who are not familiar with this test, is basically an ultrasound to your neck that will find plaque. And is this study, the numbers might be a little bit too small, so I'm going to skip to the next number, which is the big part of this video. How Dr. Brewer, at 57 years old, found out that had arteries of a 73-year-old. How did that make you feel, Dr. Brewer? What happened at that moment in your life?
Well, you know, as I said, probably too much, trying to boost my own equity or believability in this space. I've said many times, I ran the program in preventive medicine at Johns Hopkins. Didn't understand why in med school, didn't understand why doctors were so focused on following cookbooks rather than actually looking at the evidence. And didn't want to go into started off thinking about surgery, but it was really clear. People were just shoveling against a tide of stuff, procedures that paid doctors a lot of money, but really didn't do the patients very much good. So I finally found my home in preventive medicine, went to Johns Hopkins, the best place in the world to do it, loved it, and ended up running the program. The reason I said that was I practiced what I preached. At that point in time, this was 30 years ago, it was low fat. More of all the carbs you want, but low fat. And was on more of a low fat diet for about 30 years. Now, this was now the immediate setting was this. I was at a Bale Dunning conference. I had just done I think it was my second, maybe my third retirement. And my retirement's,
How many retirements have you done?
I don't know. The last one lasted what, about 5 hours,
Oh God.
and and then I got full time back into this activity, the YouTube channel activity, and the telemedicine practice we have, because I like playing golf and I like traveling, but this is very, very exciting for me and a lot of fun to do this stuff. Anyhow, so after my second retirement, the some friends of mine, I was in Nashville. I had just quit working for a company called Premise, and
Mhm.
that provided on-site health care. I was the chief medical officer. It was about 1,000 doctors and nurse practitioners, and we put healthcare preventive healthcare units in all of the um, like most of the Fortune 500 companies,
Mhm.
because they knew they couldn't get prevention and they wanted us to help set that up for them. The reason I enjoyed this channel so much was by the time we got to about 50,000 subscribers, we had already gotten to where I was getting more eyeball time, more viewer time than my 1,000 doctors and nurse practitioners. Anyhow, I'm going down another bunny hole.
You're in your third bunny hole, just like at the third retirement. I just asked you how you felt at the moment you found out you had plaque.
So I was at this. Some people said, you need to go to this Bale Doneen conference. I would like for you to
Okay.
see this fellow named Brad Bale and Amy Doneen. They're going around. They're talking about a very different way of looking at heart attack and strokes. They do this thing called test, don't guess. And so I talked to Brad and Amy. I read their book. I was intrigued. I went to a conference that they had in Vegas.
Mhm.
They have these vendors in the hallway, and a couple of the vendors were CIMT vendors. And I thought, oh, I'd heard about this. I'd read about this with Brad and Amy, and I wanted to get one. So I plopped up on the table, and the guy wouldn't tell me what he saw.
Hmm.
And then a few minutes later, he said, yeah, well, we see a little something.
When they don't, when somebody is doing a test on you and don't want to tell you what it is, that's not
That's
good
not
news,
good.
right?
And my first thought was, oh, this has got to be wrong. Because, I'm Mr. Healthy. I watched my weight. There was one time when I got maybe 30 pounds overweight, but that, to me, at 5'10", that was like 180 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I lost that. That was when I was a teenager. So that couldn't have been it. And I was right. I don't think that was it. In fact, as you start looking deeper in, well, here again, you ask about the emotion. I had this feeling after the denial phase of saying that couldn't be right. Then the next phase was, dang, I've done all this work for decades and I still have plaque.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the next frustration point. And it wasn't until 6 or 8 weeks later that it started to dawn on me. Well, you know what? Maybe my genetics are not the greatest. Maybe there's something I'm doing wrong in terms of my lifestyle. And guess what? Maybe if I hadn't done what I've been doing for the past 3 decades, mostly in terms of staying thin and low and keeping my body low fat, if I had not done that, I might be dead by now.
Mm-hmm. When you say low fat, you're referring to body fat, right?
Continued. I stayed in my whole adult life. I stayed in a BMI of 22, 23 level. And I did a ton of running. I did multiple marathons, a lot of distance running, which I don't do now. I do more HIIT training and resistance training, which is another bunny hole for another time. But yeah, so I looked at this and I actually got another. You see, this is from one group. I actually got another CIMT from the other group, and they both correlated pretty well. I was a 57-year-old with 73-year-old arteries, despite the fact that I had been Mr. Preventive Medicine my whole adult life, and that hurt.
Mm-hmm.
You ready to move on?
Seems like you're not. You're still dealing with that, right?
Oh, no, I meant move on the slides.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So
I thought you said that. So yeah, let's move on the slides.
I'm going to
Before
show
we before we go there, I think we're gonna move into explaining the chart and all of that. But what what was that that source of carbs that you used to just binge on? That
Oh, I was a
yeah.
bread addict. So the way I stayed thin, and traveled. I was as I said, a chief medical officer for national companies. So there were many times when I spent 2 or 3 days per month in the office. Most of that last time I was living in Nashville, Tennessee, and the rest of the time was in airports and on airplanes and visiting sites and coaching doctors and visiting clients. So you got to eat out a lot, and it was really clear that I couldn't eat like just regular food. What I had to do was I always had a salad and usually a piece of meat.
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways, I'm finding out. You fast forward to today, a lot of people call that diet carnivore diet.
Mm-hmm.
However, there were a couple of major differences between what I was eating and the quote carnivore diet that people include salads with. Here's the thing. I was a bread addict, so we would sit down to dinner and I knew I was going to get like a Caesar salad with a piece of tuna on top. But I'd really want them to bring out the bread plate because I felt like, that's where I was going to get my calories. Bread, bread, and more bread.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, and I ate desserts too, but we usually shared desserts. And so then the next question was, well, what did I eat for breakfast? A lot of people, on the standard American diet eat grain products too, like cereals, aren't, and then other stuff that's bad for you, like orange juice. But I didn't do that. I remember I was basically living about half time in San Antonio for 3 years when we were setting up the Toyota plant there, the truck plant.
Mm-hmm.
We stayed at the Drury Inn on the Riverwalk. It was a great place, and I had my favorite breakfast there. It wasn't cereal. It was, quote, healthy, end quote. It was, those waffle irons,
Mm-hmm.
and they have the waffle batter right there, and you can make yourself a fresh waffle. So, yes, what I would have is a waffle with that syrup on it. And then I didn't like orange juice so much, but they had cranberry juice. And the
Oh,
cranberry
yeah.
juice they have, it may, if there's anything worse than orange juice for breakfast, it might be that sugared up cranberry juice. It's more of a sugar juice than a cranberry
Mm-hmm.
juice.
It is.
So that's what I had.
Way to go from waffles to Terry Black's barbecue, right? After
Yes.
16 years.
Yeah.
All right. So why don't you go ahead and explain this chart to us? I just so your people know, those who are geeks and love science and statistics would love this. Those who are like me and sometimes get tired of all the numbers will hate it for a little bit. But Dr. Brewer loves this chart. And there's a big, deep, important message behind it. I gotta accept. Wanna go there, Dr. Brewer?
So if you go back, yes. So my IMT, intimate media thickness test, we won't go into exactly how that's measured, but you can see that on some of the other studies. They found that my average was 0.884. Now you go back here and you say, you go over to 0.884 and you cross down, you look at my age, which was 57 at the time, and you put it there. Well, now let's go back and say, well, wait a minute. If that's how we got my arterial age, what are these blue and pink lines? The blue and pink lines are your averages for tens of thousands of boys and girls, men and women, and you can guess which one's blue and which one's pink. You can also probably guess why men tend to have heart attacks a decade before women. Yes, people think that things like breast cancer are the major killers of women, but no, heart attack kills more women than breast cancer. Many more women. It
Mm-hmm.
just kills them later than it kills men. So here I was as a male, and my CIMT, the distance between the intima and the media of my artery walls was that thick. that much thicker than your typical male. Why? Probably because of all those dang waffles and cranberry juice.
Well, and there are two things to mention over there. At your age, at 57 years old, you were supposed to have an average of that IMT measurement, something closer to 0.75, and you were at
Mm-hmm.
zero point 0.8. And the other thing is, you probably missed it on the first slide because the slides are too big, but we can go back and just mention that you did have some plaque on both sides of your neck above 1 millimeter. So the zero
Mm-hmm.
point 0.8 was your average, but you did have plaque that was beyond 1 millimeter, which is
Well,
also dangerous.
talk about being getting geeky.
Well, I can deny what I am after all.
The pot
Well,
calling the kettle black here.
before we go to the next slide, I don't understand that reference, but let's move on. Uh, uh, yeah. This is not slang classes for me today. What did you do? So you found out you had plaque. You felt frustrated, devastated. Low fat wasn't working, and you found out your arteries were 20 years older. What did you do?
I don't think you want to hear, Jesus. And I know the people on the show don't want to hear. So I'm not going to tell you.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Is that so? I thought you were
And I didn't
teasing.
want to hear it. I didn't want to hear it. I mean, I had, this was, talk about another frustrating moment. I think everybody's going to expect to hear me say, first thing I did was cut carbs. I was not quite there yet. I did not understand that yet. What did I
Hmm.
understand? Something that I had fought. My family used to call me Doctor 3 Days
Hmm.
because they'd come to me and say, "Hey, Daddy, I got a sore throat and I got a cough, and they wanted an antibiotic." And I would say, "Well, it does sound like you're sick. Maybe you've got an infection, and it's probably a virus. And let's wait 3 days." And they used to stay mad at me for that because I didn't want to use medications. Never did. But after having gone to this Baledanine conference and having heard about low dose statins for and baby aspirin, if you have plaque, the guy backed up his statements pretty well. And actually, we're going to talk a little bit more about what other folks are saying in that space too. But I know I've gotten pilloried in this community for saying what I'm about to say. The first thing I did was I agreed to take a statin. It was a low dose statin. And what was very interesting was what happened over the next 3 months. Um, we, because of what I started doing this type of work with Brad, he joined my clinic. And I was bringing in patients. We had somebody coming down to our clinic in Nashville every month or two doing CIMTs. So I would just hop up on the table and we started seeing a smooth, clear curve. You could say, well, Ford, no, it was just bumping up and down. This is what you had. And that's the problem with CIMT. It bumps up and down. You're going to see some evidence through this that, no, that's not the case. Unfortunately, I don't have the four studies, the CIMTs between this one and the next one, which showed a very smooth and clear decline down to the next image.
All
Did
right.
did I butcher that up, or are we
Well,
good?
you kind of did. Let me let me before we go to the punchline. Two things that I want to know. Well, want to mention and know. Whenever we say statins, you have people that just block their ears and they're like,
Yeah,
"No, I don't want to hear about statins. That's poison. That's just medication made by big pharma for profit, and it's gonna hurt my body." And there is some truth to that. However, they miss the part of low dose,
yeah,
and that's the key difference. And even though I think you have come a long way from your perspective after 16 years, because even though you started with statins, you have said over and over again, statins help, but it wasn't until you understood that it was the carbs that it
Yeah.
was the inflammatory response to high glucose, high insulin levels that was causing the problem. You improved your diet, cutting carbs, improved your exercise routine, which is also important. Then statins kept helping. Even though you started with statins, lifestyle was far more important, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. There's no question. And I appreciate you clarifying that. I knew people were going to hate that first comment. Ken Berry saw my video on it and started going into that too. And I don't blame folks. The bottom line is there have been multiple, uh, very clear, head to head randomized clinical trials. Just moderate lifestyle changes make a much bigger difference than any kind of medication. There are times when I've had patients, given what we do with this YouTube channel and then having patients come see us, there are times when over half of my patients that had plaque said, thanks, but no thanks on a low dose statin. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not a statin. That's not the big deal. If you start looking at what I did over the next few months, yes, I did. The statin was a stopgap. I, I discovered over the next few months that I had insulin resistance. And then it was like, oh my gosh, well, I need to stop the breads. I stopped the breads, and just that alone made me lose a few pounds, like 5 pounds. So we know from what what you and I are doing in the clinic all day, you and the team, that's what happened. I changed my metabolism entirely, and
And
it was for me, it was mostly a simple item. Like I had said before, yes, I eat I eat desserts. I'm a sweets addict. There's no question about that. But I'm sort of a low level now, got it under control kind of addict in terms of the sweets. The big
Mhm.
issue was breads, grain products. And that's the case, and I'm not that unusual. That's the case for the vast majority of people that come into the clinic, the vast majority of people that I've seen. It's the case for the vast majority of people on the standard American diet, and even folks that are like me, quote, on a healthy diet, end quote, especially in the last 30 years when a quote healthy diet was low fat. If you're going low fat, you have to replace those carbs with those calories with something. And unfortunately, most of the time, replacing those fat calories went with carbs.
oh yeah. And you bring up a really good point. We had a conference in Dallas just last month. Right next to the venue, there was this donut store. It was a really test of willpower. Go in front of that thing, smell the donuts, and don't go in and buy some. And all of the folks that went to the conference had to deal with that. And it's part of the deal, understanding that sometimes the most appealing, the most delicious things that you can eat are the most dangerous ones. And it's hard to wrap your head around the risk because they're not going to kill you immediately. They're just slowly killing you, building plaque in your arteries. Now,
Slow suicide with carbs.
that's right.
I got to make this comment. I took a picture of that for the same reason. When I walked by, I thought, and I expected to get to, that fresh donut smell. And I expected to think, oh man, this is really nice. But I've been so low carb for so long, as I've shared with you, I'm exhaling acetone just about every day, usually about 10 parts per million, between 5 and 15. So I'm staying ketotic. What was
Mhm.
interesting was when I sniffed that smell that you're talking about for the fresh donuts, my stomach kind of turned. It didn't, it made me sick. It was a
Oh,
sickening smell.
you get to that point.
Yeah.
I didn't feel that with the donuts, and just so you know, I'm far behind on the journey compared to you. I'm fortunate enough that I started my journey way earlier than you, but I used to be a soda addict years ago, and I used
Mm.
to love that grapefruit soda with some tequila on it. And
Mm.
I had a party for one of for my oldest son, and I was just too lazy to get up and get some water. And I was like, I'm gonna try a shot of this grapefruit soda. I almost throw up.
Oh,
I almost
really?
throw up. So I'm getting there. I'm getting there to
There
that
you go.
moment where I'm not gonna be tolerating processed sugars and sweets, sweet beverage. But you get there, and you did
Yeah.
get there, and you had a CIMT from 2019 that proves that. Look at those numbers.
Yeah.
You were 62 years old at the time, with an arterial age of 55, with your average going from zero point 0.8 to 0.69. Really, really impressive.
Yeah. So again, to your point, we don't have all of those images of CIMTs in between. But after finding out that I had plaque, I did. I started first on the low dose statin, and then very quickly over the next 2 to 3 months, met with Brad and realized I had and got my labs. Realized I had prediabetes. My A1Cs were hovering around 5.6. I had some not the greatest triglyceride over HDL ratio. My fractionation wasn't good. It was clear that I had a pre-diabetic metabolism, that oxidative metabolism that Robert Lustig talks about. I had that going on. So that was when I realized I really needed to cut back and get rid of the breads, get rid of the carbs, a lot of too many carbs, and started changing. When I did, you started seeing that a smooth curve on my arterial age going down. It was less. This was what, 4 years later. It was less than that. It was like less than a year. My arterial age had dropped back down to less than 57.
Mm-hmm.
And this 2019 was stability. And as you and I have mentioned, I did my most recent one at this past December in at the event in St. Pete. But you're going to say, but I can't tell them my results then. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So you have a 2023 CMT. Folks, we're planning on a relaunch video from the original greatest hit from Dr. Brewer. How did he reverse 20 years of arterial plaque? And we're gonna show that CMT in that video. So stay tuned. But let's see this graph
You can
now.
see Jesus has turned into a real editorial type channel manager here. It's
You
very
created a
exciting and fun to watch.
you created a monster.
Created a
Now,
monster.
look at this graph. Now, the red dot used to be way above the average for your age,
It
and
was
it's now
0.88.
even below the average for your age at 62.
Yeah, so it was 0.88 back at age 57. So it was way up here. And then, and that's what happened. It just did a very, the first couple of months, it started off slow and then it just plummeted.
And just also consider this. I mean, going back to statistics and definitions, this is normal. Doesn't necessarily mean healthy. This is what most people have. So even to those standards, you want to be below those lines. And
Yeah.
the bad news is that you start building up that plaque even at 18 years old, 25-year old and above, and it's years of progress. So no surprise, a lot of people have some plaque develop on their necks at 60 years old. Now, before we go to the next explanation, how do you feel now? How do you feel after decreasing on the bread, eating a ton of barbecue from Terry Black's, eating a lot of avocado, butter on your coffee, and somebody was surprised that you're putting natto on your coffee, doing tons of exercises, lead pulling, high intensity interval training, being on a better shape that I am right now, but I'm gonna get you. How do you feel now?
Oh, well, you know that we're doing the DEXA scans as well. And the DEXA scan that we're using is saying that it said twice, my total body fat percent is like 21. And on their scale, their nomograms, that's the average body fat of an 18-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of what I'm eating and what I'm, like you said, yeah, I'm 67, but I'm doing My hard workout I do on Saturday evenings or Sunday evenings, and it's a hard half-mile bike ride, uh, a hard 4-mile run, and in that 4-mile run, I get 8 hill sprints, and then I do a very aggressive sled pull. It's only got like 60 pounds on the sled, but I'm pulling it across fields, and the fields in the summer grow up with a lot of hay in them. So I'm put the hay really makes it a lot harder. Bottom line, and then I'm doing a battle rope. So doing a lot of really hard work that you tend to not see at my age. You tend to see at much younger ages. And I feel
Exactly
great.
right. I mean, I was surprised on the first conference in St. Pete and then the second one in Dallas, seeing people over 60 years old with the shape that the people who went to the conference and seeing your shape at 60 years old. To me, it was surprising because most 60 years old people that I see in Mexico are nowhere near. They're not capable to do the kind of exercise that you're doing right now.
Oh yeah.
It takes effort. It's painful to get to that point. It's worth it, but it's hard for people to understand that you need to do the work. You need to do the changes on the way you eat. You need to do the changes on the way you live if you want to live longer and a better quality of life. I think that's the hardest moment. That's the hardest thing to do. And fortunately enough, you did that almost immediately after finding out about your plaque. You were on that road anyway.
Yeah. And a lot of people would say, well, you don't. So we'd get our heart. I'll get my heart rate up to, I think the average for my age, 80% is supposed to be like what, low 100s, but I get it up
Mhm.
to 155, 160, 165. And people say, well, isn't that dangerous for a 67-year-old? Well, I mean, I'm sure it is for your typical 67-year-old, but if I did this last week and the week before and the week before that for the past decade and my body's used to it, why is that dangerous for me now?
If you're eating crackers, donuts, soda,
Yeah.
cereal, orange juice all day, every day, yeah, that's probably going to be dangerous for you doing that type of exercise. All right, so let's go back to the geekiness a little bit. People is interested to know about plaque. We want to explain some fundamental thing. You promise this is not clickbait. We want to deliver differences between soft plaque and calcified plaque. This is from the famously done Honda study that you promote every day. And surprisingly, not a lot of people I haven't seen anybody else on YouTube mentioning this study, but it's a landmark study in regards to carotid intima media thickness test. And it gives us these beautiful images of comparison between soft plaque and calcified plaque. Want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. First of all, we got to go back and look at the difference between standard medicine and true prevention. So in standard medicine, they say, well, you know what? It's plumbing. It's your flow. And if your flow is good, then you're fine. So when you start thinking like a plumber, you start going into things like stress tests. And you would say, well, here's what your Framingham said. Why don't we get a stress test? Well, that makes all kinds of sense, and it seems just like common sense, but sometimes common sense doesn't work. If you look at the science, the literature, the Princeton Prevention Program was one of the first groups coming out with this, and they said, look, 2/3 of heart attacks and strokes happen in people with less plaque than you're going to see with any flow study. If you do a stress test, you got to get a 50% occlusion of flow, a 50% drop in flow to see anything on the stress test. Over 2/3 of heart attacks and strokes occur in people who don't have a 50% decrease in flow. So we've got to look different. We wrote that whole book. It might be boring, but it's all about the science on why a stress test won't prevent a heart attack. And that's not.
It helps me sleep, Dr. Brewer. It's a
Yeah,
good book.
I know it's better than a sleeping pill for sure. We don't want you to medicate to go to sleep. Just get my book and try reading it. But that's the thing. You've got to understand plaque a lot better. And here's what is clear. If you have any plaque at all, when you go from zero plaque to having some plaque, a zero calcium score to a calcium score of 1, all of a sudden now your risk factor for heart attack and stroke has changed dramatically. Now, this is another part where you're just not going to see this on other channels. Um, Other channels will talk about calcium score, but like Ivor Cummins, there used to be a lot of overlap between our channel and Ivor's until the pandemic, and then he got a lot more into some other stuff. But yes, calcium score is a great thing to look at. But here's the problem with calcium score: it only shows you calcium. It really doesn't show you soft plaque. And you go back to these images on the Honda study; these were very, very clear. They took 100 people that had this kind of plaque up at the top, soft plaque, and there's very little calcification in it. You can tell, you can say, well, maybe we're just being subjective. Maybe this is just our eyes telling us that there's more plaque in the one down at the bottom. No, another thing that Honda did was he took easy for me to say, optical character recognition, OCR, and quantified these numbers. And it's really, really clear. If you have non-calcified plaque, you're very likely, you've got major risk for having a heart attack or stroke event over the next few months to years. Once you get calcified, you've got almost the same risk as someone else who doesn't have plaque. So if you haven't seen that study, the Honda study, we've got videos on it, or you can be a patient and we can help you understand this and what it means directly to you.
And for people to understand the images real quick, this is an ultrasound to your neck called carotid intima media thickness test, which measures the amount of plaque that you get built up below the inner layer of your artery wall in your neck. It's a non-invasive test. It's a cheap test to get. The bad thing is hard to get it with a person who actually knows how to do it. But you see, everything that's black, it's basically something that the ultrasound cannot identify, something that the ultrasound cannot see, like inflammation goo, like blood flow, unless you change some parameters and start looking at some red and blue colors that represent the blood flow. But in this case, we're focusing on the plaque below the inner layer. So you see on the top image, you have a lot of black with some white on it, which Dr. Brewer mentioned is calcium. And at the bottom image, you see a lot of white in it, which is a plaque that is heavily calcified. And that's what we want to explain further on, because when you have a calcium score and they say, okay, my calcium score is elevated, I'm at high risk because I've had calcium in my arteries, I'm going to die, I'm going to start taking tons of vitamin K2 to pull out that calcium. We say, wait a minute, take a deep breath, because maybe having calcium in your arteries is not such a bad news. But you need to understand how calcium gets grouped. And this thing that's coming right now, it's the difference between types of calcifications. Dr. Brewer is playing with the slides and just broke the full momentum I had building up for the next slide. Guys, I went from answer Nazi to monster manager. We're going to explain to you the difference between calcified plaque. But before we go there, please show the next image, Dr. Brewer, that nobody has seen yet. Did you know 70% of the folks who watch this channel are not subscribed? And that's really sad. It makes me feel real sad about it. We want to change that. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, please go ahead, click the subscribe button. It's completely free. And if you want to get notified about when a video is coming out, click the bell so you will know when we are releasing a new video. We released a fantastic video yesterday, top 7 foods that clean out arteries. I know, but we're trying to advocate to also reach people who are not aware of this stuff on their daily lives. We know that the people who watch our channel are people who are down the road of a healthy lifestyle. A patient of ours mentioned on a highway to health. So a lot of people are there on the highway to health. And we want to reach more people who are not aware of this big problem, insulin resistance, prediabetes, and diabetes. And you subscribing, sharing, hitting the like button, all of that is helpful. And if you want to go the extra mile, click on the join button It's an extra, a couple of extra bucks a month, and you will get your questions answers during the live show. So let's move on now. Want to explain about the difference between soft plaque and the difference between multiple calcifications in arteries, Dr. Brewer?
Sure. This is a obviously a cross section of an artery, and it's a real one. It's a um, under a microscope. And the reason they were able to do this is because this patient died, and the patient died from a heart attack. It wasn't this plaque that ruptured, but it was another one. And as you can see, it's very clear looking at this. This patient has plaque. This brown stuff up here is nice and stable. But what you see with soft plaque is this. You can see how it's retracted away from the slide material, showing that it is liquid. And that's the problem. The other thing that you see is the intima, the lining of the artery wall. And so as long as this lining is intact, as long as that lining's intact, this is safe. But the problem with this stuff is this inflammatory liquid in here, the T cells, the macrocytes, the mostly macrocytes and polymorphs, the inflammatory cells, and maybe the cytokines, the proteins in it, and the liquid in it. Once it hits the blood, it has a high risk of causing plaque. A clot. And it's not the plaque itself that kills people. It's not pieces of plaque breaking off like people think. It's one of these hot plaques breaking out, touching the blood, and forming a clot. If the clot's big enough and it goes to the heart, it's a heart attack. If it's big enough and it goes to the brain, it's a stroke.
Wonderful. Now, let me try to explain a little bit on regards to calcification. Dr. Brewer, you can come in and translate for me any moment. Calcification of plaque, you have to think about it as a healing and defense mechanism from the body to deal with all this inflammation goo that is happening around. When Dr. Brewer mentions all those polymorphs and all those other cytokines, it's basically inflammation. And to see there on those images, those small white points, dots in there, that's calcium that's getting developed. But there are two types of calcification, which it's important for you to understand and differentiate. And I love, this is from an article where they're trying to describe that. They come up with the terms passive calcification versus active calcification. So passive calcification is what happens to the average folk. The one that's binging on sodas, eating a lot of bread, not doing exercise, accumulating a lot of body fat on their bellies. The body is fighting relentlessly with that inflammation goo in the artery, but it's not making it as it should. Every piece of calcium that it creates gets overloaded with a bunch of more inflammation. And what you end up producing is all those kind of islands of calcium surrounded by inflammation and a very, very thin cap on top where the blood flow comes that you can see there with the blue arrow. And it's so thin, less than 65 nanometers, that it can rupture anytime, even if the plaque is not big enough. So even a small plaque with a thin cap with that passive calcification can rupture. And you can catch that on a CIMT. You can catch that on a calcium score. You can catch that on a CT angiogram. Now, compare that calcification versus the active calcification type, which is also a healing, a scarring process. But the difference is you are working actively to achieve that. How do you do that? Cutting carbs, exercising more, eating healthy fats, and you guessed it, one way to do it, low dose statins.
Now
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Brewer.
You mentioned cutting carbs, and I talked mostly about bread, but we said sugar in the intro. Was that just clickbait?
Oh, I'm sorry. It was. You folks know better than most people and most doctors. It's not sugar overall. It's just to make it simple. Dr. Brewer wanted to clarify what we mean, what we say when we say sugar.
So, and in fact, what's going on with quote complex carbohydrates is there are sugar molecules that are just joined together in a chain. And people say, well, what you want is quote whole grains. Well, I mean, whole wheat bread is um, is a sugar. Whole wheat. If you eat whole wheat bread, it puts more sugar in your blood quicker than a teaspoon of table sugar.
Mm-hmm.
So that it is sugar. The grains that we're talking about, processed grains.
Yep. And overall, I won't disregard sugar sweetened beverage and processed foods overall, because you guys, if you have followed the channel, you're probably off that anyway. But there are millions and millions of people worldwide still addicted to your potato chips, addicted to your sodas, addicted to your breads, addicted to other stuff that's just poisonous, and they don't know this information. That's the people who we're trying to reach to. So share the video. That's really helpful. Now, one other thing that I wanted you to see on this active calcification part. Do you see the difference between the thick cap, the thin cap, and the overall distribution of the plaque on regards to the calcium? It's more uniform. You're giving time to your body to condense that calcium to create a barrier that will make that this artery is not going to rupture, not going to create a clot, not going to cause a heart attack. The cap is thicker, so it won't rupture that easily. Actually, most of heart attacks that happen next to a calcified plaque don't happen in the calcified plaque itself, happen next to it, where there's still some soft plaque that hasn't calcified. And I wanted to give an analogy for you guys, try to see if we can make this understandable. If you're familiar with the Three Little Pigs story, imagine you're trying to build a house within your arteries. You can choose to make that plaque out of straws, which is soft plaque. You can choose to make your house out of sticks, wood sticks, like in passive calcification type, or you can choose make your house of bricks that won't rupture, don't create a clot, don't let the big wolf from a heart attack go there and destroy everything for you. Dr. Brewer, want to talk about one? This is one plaque from Dr. Brewer. You're looking at the insides of Dr. Brewer's arteries. Want to comment on this one?
Nothing more than what you're seeing there is a moderate level of calcification.
I'll say it's a full calcification. It's white, bright in white.
Yeah.
And I have a moderate calcification to show from your CIMT. See this one?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a thick cap, that blue thing down to the arrow. Then it's a kind of black space, and then a spot that is really, really white, but still you can see some black beneath it. So there's still some slight inflammation going there, but the cap is really thick, and that makes it more stable rather than unstable.
Back to the emotional part. During that time period, back in when I was 57, I was running like about a half marathon each weekend. I'd get up on Saturdays and run. I lived in Lexington in the horse country, about a mile from the airport and a mile and a half from Keeneland horse race track, and some of the most beautiful horse country in the world. And I remember getting up after that weekend to go do my run and thinking, if I have a heart attack, I'll fall in a ditch next to a horse farm here, and nobody will ever find me. Not for weeks, maybe hours, what days, whenever. And even though I knew that, I had well organized plaque, it's an emotional issue. You feel a lot of concern. I made my run that day, but I remember that feeling walking along the side or jogging along the side of the horse farm. Stopped and walked for a few minutes, thinking, "Do I really want to do this?" I decided to go ahead, and obviously I'm fine, but we have to talk a lot of patients through that as well.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that part of the story. And before I go there to the next one, I wanted to give another something that maybe if it hasn't clicked by now, we want that to click. What do we mean when we say plaque reversal, Dr. Brewer? What do you mean by that? What do you mean? What do you think your IMT went from 0.8 to 0.6 on average?
Well, so that's a really, really good point. And you've got to understand the components of plaque before you understand this next piece. And I'll just go make that quick statement. We don't have images. We do have, if you're interested in this, we still have the old cardiovascular inflammation courses. And there's plenty of pictures showing on those courses what a soft plaque looks like. It's got fluid in it. It's got a whole bunch of immune cells, monocytes, macrocytes, leukocytes, and those are all trying to erase and devour and digest, break down that plaque. That is the problem there. So what happens when you start reversing and calcifying that plaque is that you get those cytokines, those proteins, those enzymes that are trying to break this up, the monocytes, the macrocytes, the immune cells, all of those things start getting sucked out, and then it becomes stable again. And that's what happens when you decrease the CIMT, the distance between this intima layer and the media layer, that red, oops, where did we go here? Okay. That distance between this intima, the lining of the artery, which is between the soft plaque and the blood flow, and that red layer, the muscle layer. Once you start pulling all this fluid out, these cells, these inflammatory cells, these enzymes, then it shrinks down to a much lower level. Now, are you ready for me to talk a little bit more? Any other thoughts about that before I go to what Harvard's saying?
Well, let me try to give it a shot with another analogy that might not be the best. I'm going to think about a better one. But for now, imagine that you have a balloon filled with water and rocks on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just too big because it has some rocks in it, which is the calcium, and a bunch of water, which correlates to the inflammation.
Inflammation, yeah.
You can think about, instead of water, think about vomit, something disgusting that is in there. So you have a balloon full of vomit and rocks. As you decrease that vomit, you take out that vomit, that inflammation from the balloon, you're going to get a balloon that is more comprised and in contact with the rocks, the calcium. So not the best analogy, but that's how you have a big plaque over here. As you deflate that, taking out that inflammation goo, it will reduce. That's plaque reversal right there.
So, you know that it used to be our number one video, and it still is, the one with 4.5 million views. And it's talking about this experience, my plaque reversal. One of the comments I got was, my doctor is the chief of cardiology at, I think it was Cedars-Sinai in LA. And he said, so obviously he's extremely good. And he said, this is impossible. You do not reverse plaque. And it was like, even 10 years ago, the head of cardiology at Harvard was saying, yeah, you can reverse plaque. You remember I said this in the intro. I said, most doctors in the everyday workday world are just seeing so many patients. They're not taking the time. They're not reading. They're not aware that you can actually reverse plaque. Some guys do know this, and it's becoming more and more well known. In fact, as I said, about 10 years ago, Harvard Men's Health did cover that. And they said the two places where you tend to see plaque reversal are, number one, 30-pound weight loss. Number two, so significant lifestyle changes like a 30-pound weight loss. And number two, somebody who is naive to statins before and started on statins. Now, Harvard's Men's Health has actually updated their article on this. And I wanted to run through it quickly because what you started to see with Harvard Health was, even though they agreed with us on plaque reversal even 10 years ago, they've started to agree more and more with stuff that we're talking about. So, for example, what causes arterial plaque? Cholesterol lodging in the artery wall, and it forms that cap. And as Jesus was showing a few minutes ago, the real focus is how fibrous is that cap and how much foamy cells ooze into are being developed, how much inflammation you have. And in fact, the next page of their article, they talk about, hey, we've got a whole course now on fighting inflammation, because inflammation is what's causing this problem. That's interesting because even Harvard was not there 10 years ago. This was done 2 or 3 years ago, and now they're there. It's inflammation. Now they're starting to say, can you unclog it? And you say, making plaque disappear totally is not possible, but with lifestyle changes and medications, you can shrink and stabilize it. So again, getting very, very similar to our message as well. Not exactly correct. I mean, not exactly where we are. We'll talk in a few minutes. We'll show where they're different. For example, the drugs they talked about, atorvastatin and rosuvastatin. We don't use atorvastatin. We don't use Crestor. I mean, we don't use Lipitor. We do use very low dose Crestor, and he doesn't talk about low doses, but he does go on to say intensive lifestyle changes have been shown to shrink plaque. It's right there. Now, doctors especially want to target the softer plaques before they rupture. So for example, if you have a 30% blockage in the artery from soft plaque, the goal is to try to suck out that small dense cholesterol from the inside. So the plaque shrivels down to 15% and leaves nothing inside of it. So how do you do that? How do you change it? Lifestyle, intensive lifestyle modifications. Now, this is where we still differ. He's saying eat a Mediterranean diet. From my perspective, Mediterranean is a really bad name. It's been overused, and it can include all the grains you want to eat as well as all the grapes and carbs. It says nothing clear at all about the level of carbs. The level of glycemic carbohydrates, how much your blood sugar stays elevated, is the critical piece here. So he and I are not in a total alignment on that issue. Clearly, I think almost all of us are in total alignment on the next item, smoking. And we did. We had a patient come to us. We'll get about one patient or two per year that comes to us that's smoking. And smoking is radioactive on your artery walls.
Almost everybody, Dr. Brewer. Don't ask Dr. Grundry.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. Talk about another bunny hole. So, and in fact, we've got 2 minutes, so I'm going to need to blitz through. Aerobic exercise, I'd say, yeah, aerobic's okay. I used to do marathons, but I don't so much anymore. I focus on HIIT training and resistance training based on some of the Mayo studies and a lot of the new evidence that's come out.
Yeah.
Exercise combined with weight loss.
And Dr. Brewer, not to say you cannot do marathons. I mean, if you want to do marathons, that's fine. Just don't rely on that alone.
Correct. And we're talking with a fellow that's one of the heads of the low carb community,
Dr.
Cucuzzello, and he's a barefoot runner. I tried some of that and didn't like it at all, but I've done several half dozen marathons, several dozen half marathons, and we'll be talking with him. He's like me. Even though he was a marathon runner at the time, that's when he discovered his diabetes, type 2 diabetes, developing as a marathon runner. And it was because he was eating a ton of carbs. Same thing with me. I was eating a ton of carbs and not doing the resistance training, not doing the HIIT training. So then he's now going into busting the cholesterol myth. He's understanding that it's not just LDL, but he's not completely there where we are saying, LDL matters, but very, very little. It's much, and the lean mass hyper responder studies are showing that. Okay, so I think that's what I wanted to cover in terms of the Harvard, where Harvard's progression from the past few years to where they are now.
Well, let me tell you, I was a little bit skeptical or showing those screenshots because that's your new version of the shaky paper days. A little bit improvised, just a quick screenshot over there. I want to put this on the show. You have 5 minutes to prepare it, but I'm glad we were able to put it on the show. I mean, folks, my goal was to keep this live under 1 hour. That's not gonna be possible. Let's go to Q&A. I'll sacrifice the length of the video for you guys. If you're not a YouTube member from PrepMed just yet, no answer for you. If you're familiar with Seinfeld and no soup for you joke, that's what that's coming from. But no, jokes aside, it's just so much time that we have to cover questions. So what we did is invite you to join the PrepMed Health channel. Those folks who have an icon next to it, just like Keith Lawson, will get your your questions answered first, or your comments read on screen. Keith Lawson, I really like your shorts. Thank you so much. I don't know how. Are you wearing shorts, Dr. Brewer? I can see them.
What? Am I wearing shorts?
Yeah, I know. He meant YouTube shorts. I'm just messing around. What about joke? Lisa Bill. For the last 3 months, I have eliminated all sugars and most carbs, especially no refined carbs. Way to go. However, my fasting glucose has remained just above 100. No change. Fasting insulin, less than 10 for years. Any comments on that, Dr. Brewer?
I mean, it's what we talk about. It's what we see. It's what we do all day, every day, working with patients. There's maybe one thing that's more important than to getting rid of that insulin-driven, glucose-driven type 2 diabetes, insulin-resistant metabolism, that oxidative metabolism that Robert Lustig talks about, and that is decreasing your body fat, increasing your muscle mass, and then getting the sugar, getting the glycemic carbs out of your diet. And those go right in hand. You start getting that glucose out of your diet, and that's where you end up healthier.
Well, and I think Listerville is asking about why no reduction on fasting glucose despite that. And I mean, we don't have the complete information. That's kind of the analysis we do with patients. One thing that I have seen happening over and over again is patients doing a great job on the diet, but not doing that much of a great job on the exercise. To me, what I have seen, most of those levels of glucose above 100 is basically glycogen storage that is being burned over time instead of being burned either with fasting or exercising. I don't know if you have the same perspective or this is just an aging genetic problem, Dr. Brewer.
Well, I'll say the other thing. The other thing that I mean, it underlines the failure and error in just looking at fasting glucose. One of the things that you tend to see, for example, with like me, I never had a problem with fasting glucose until it was like 2 years into a low carb lifestyle. I started getting some dawn effect. My metabolism was greatly improved. I was much more fat adapted, but I tended to get a little bit more increase in fasting glucose. And
Well,
again,
yeah,
it was dawn effect.
that's true. That's true too. You're right. Pac Northwest. Thank you for re-releasing all the content to the PrepMed podcast feed. Great to go back and listen to all the episodes, like one in particular you re-released May the 1st. I am in the ER with chest pain. Thank you so much, Park Northwest. We have come a long way through the format of the on the YouTube lives. You have seen a difference today compared to other versions, and we have also improved on publishing on podcast format, Spotify, Simplecast, other places. That one was proposed by Fred. Fred, who works with us, Fred Rowe, was on that specific chapter, and he was like, hey, a lot of people are dealing with this stuff and they don't know what to do. They need more insight about either getting a stent or not. So I appreciate you noticing that, Park Northwest. Sherry Smith, please explain for folks what who Bale-Donin is, Dr. Brewer.
There's a book, Beat the Heart Attack Gene, Bradley Bale, Amy Doneen. Um, those two have done yeoman's work. They've been traveling the country teaching mostly doctors and nurse practitioners, and then more recently, the past few years, the dental community about their basic bottom line message is that it's inflammation, it's not LDL. And
Yeah.
once you go deeper and deeper, a lot of people miss it in their book. But because Brad was working with me for a while, I went deep into their content, and at least 5 times in that book they talk about prediabetes and diabetes. When you go to their conferences, it's not quite as strong as we are in terms of insulin resistance, diabetes, prediabetes. For example, they just looked at OGTT for the longest time. I don't know if they're even doing a Kraft insulin survey yet. But as you know, you and I will miss about 15% of people with insulin resistance if we don't get that insulin response there as well. But again, Brad and Amy are still doing that work. They brought on a lot of other people to help, and they're doing God's work. I learned a heck of a lot from them.
Yeah. And if you want to know more about that, they published an article last year about oxidative stress. We covered that on the our most popular YouTube live, even though it's very, very dry. We went really geeky on that one. You might want to take a look at it on our lives history. Jump to the 18-minute mark, and you will get all the science behind of what Brad Bale and Amy Doneen published last year. JMK, I'm gonna quote. I'm gonna put this because it's context for the next one. JMK, what biomarkers should we monitor to see if our low dose statin is working? And Park Northwest is answering a second CIMT can measure at a stabilization of soft plaque or heterogeneous plaque. A couple of things to cover there. Yes, we do recommend following up with CMT once a year so you can see progress. Want to mention a little bit about soft versus heterogeneous because we didn't mention heterogeneous plaque by name today. We can talk about CMT on another show. Dr. Brewer?
So you want me to talk about soft plaque versus atherogenic plaque?
Yeah, just to mention a little bit to the folks so they understand what the point Park Northwest is trying to make.
Well, I'm not sure that I understand. I think one of the big challenges here is when you hear atherogenic plaque or just the whole term atherogenic, it's very nonspecific. It doesn't, I mean, to me, it includes both soft and hard or stable plaque. How about for you?
Well, I think for a lot of time we have mentioned that soft plaque is clear. We mentioned that. Heterogeneous plaque is kind of in the middle. Is that plaque that's in the process of calcifying? You're what are you doing right now? Are you in the show with us?
No, I had a translation effect. I thought you were talking about atherogenic, but and I'm seeing what you're saying, heterogeneous.
Oh yeah.
So there's soft plaque, then there's stable or echogenic plaque. Heterogeneous is in between. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, and I apologize, Jesus, I misunderstood. I thought you were using the term atherogenic.
One more reason to keep the shows under an hour so you can still stay focused.
So heterogeneous, I almost wish Todd wouldn't use that, but he does. And the reason I do is because heterogeneous is stable. It's practically as stable as echogenic. It's just in between.
Yep. And it can be 50%. Most people that we've seen who are doing, remember the term, active calcification, might be more something closer to 90% calcification. Those who are doing passive calcification, not really making the effort and leaving all the work, the hard job to calcify the plaque to the heart itself alone, will be more closer to 25, 50%. And it's actually that unstable calcification process that is not safe. Kid Lawson, what type of plaque was reduced? We mentioned that is basically soft plaque and turning that soft plaque or heterogeneous plaque into more calcified stable plaque, taking all that goo on it. Richard Militello, so butter is on the okay list then? Yes, it is. I
So
prefer
here's
eating butter than margarine.
so here's what I had for breakfast this morning. I had coffee with what? Probably about 2 or 3 tablespoons of butter in it,
Mm-hmm.
um, and some macadamia nuts, some couple of other nuts, some walnuts, and some pistachios. So,
Wonderful.
yep, I'm adding a lot more buttered coffee to my breakfast in the mornings.
Wonderful. I haven't had breakfast though, so I'm gonna do that right after the show. Uh, Pugner was no. This is a CMT, not an angiogram. Somebody asked about the images. Was that an angiogram? No, it was a CMT, an ultrasound. Thank you, Pugner West. You have been really active today. We appreciate that, folks. It's not like I'm ignoring all the comments. I am sorry about that, but I'm just uh, fulfilling my promise on answering YouTube member questions. CIMT looks at hard, soft, and mixed plaque on the carotid arteries. There's no logical reason to believe that other arteries, for example, the heart arteries, don't have the same profile. Well, there are some cases where you might not be able to see plaque on the carotid artery, and still you will find plaque on the coronary arteries. But I'm right 2%. But Pac Northwest is right. If you have plaque on your CIMT, almost 100% reassurance you're going to have plaque on your heart. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Charlie, yeah, subscribe. And this, I think I saw that comment that came up when I was asking people to subscribe to the channel. Thank you so
So,
much.
but she's not subscribed, or she'd have that little
Oh,
insignia right there.
Dr. Brewer, you have been on YouTube for longer period of time than I am. But the difference is you can be a subscriber or you can be a member. Joey T is a member. Look at
Oh,
the
okay.
so he's paying the extra bucks to get his question answered. Why will
Okay.
getting a CMT better? Why will getting a CMT be better than getting a CTA with AI? That's what I've been telling Dr. Brewer. I love CATA with AI. To me, it's
Oh, I
far
did too.
better. To me,
You've
it's far
converted me.
better to me. It's far better to see the plaque itself on the heart. It will tell you about the different types of plaque. It will detect soft plaque, but yes, there is downsides to it. It's more expensive. It involves injecting a dye in your vein. It involves radiation, and it involves that it depends who does the test or interprets the test. Get you in that slippery slope of getting a stent when you probably don't need it. So there are downsides to it. The CIMT is cheaper. It's really good to track progress. It's not invasive. No radiation involved.
The
We use
bottom
both.
line is we're using a lot of CT angiogram with AI now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Mm-hmm.
wonderful anatomic picture.
And we do use calcium score too. I mean, if you
Yeah,
haven't,
we use calcium score too.
if you don't have had evidence of plaque, never, and you have never had a calcium score, that's a good first step to find out if you have plaque. Tree Lady, what do you think about aspirin resistance as testing for this in the latest Beldenin version? ESP as regard to non-symptomatic?
I'm not familiar with that. Back when I was working with the Beldenine community, I was familiar with them doing some genetic studies to look to see if you, um, if you're a rapid metabolizer, and a rapid metabolizer, it was slightly different issue. Are you familiar with it, Jesus?
No, I don't think I am. I learn every day, so go ahead.
That's all
Oh,
I have to say about it.
oh, okay. I'm personally not familiar with it, but that's what I'm saying. You learn every day. I'm gonna make sure I will put this on my list of topics to cover. Aspirin is a popular topic. I think aspirin is even far more accepted as than statins, and
Yeah.
aspirin has a lot of risks too. So it's very interesting to me.
Well, it does. So let me tell you what. Go back and I'll cover a couple more things that I know about it. There is the evidence that some people are resistant to aspirin. In other words, aspirin does not have the impact on thromboxane and platelets that for them that it does for other people. Now, as Jesus said, I mean, there's the whole aspirin story it gets very complicated real fast. And I promised Jesus that I was going to be done by 15 minutes ago. So
I don't believe your promises anymore.
he screwed up. He wasn't able to keep us less than an hour. Um, you'll see headlines where aspirin's not indicated anymore. Well, those headlines are, again, just usually a gross misinterpretation of the science and what's happened. No, aspirin was never indicated if you don't have plaque. Even again, talking about the standards committees and the academicians, the standards committee for the American Heart Association, just 3 or 4 years ago, finally said, you know what? You don't need baby aspirin if you don't have plaque. And so that was a major step forward for them, but they still screwed it up. Because they said if you have a negative calcium score. So I'm not going to go down that bunny hole, but there are people that have negative calcium scores, but still have nothing but soft plaque. Those people have been shown to be at risk for heart attack. The other quick thing I'll mention, a lot of people would say, and I could make this debate as well, that the NOACs, the novel oral anticoagulants, may be safer than statin. I mean, maybe safer than baby aspirin. But they're expensive as heck. I mean, we're talking about Xarelto, Eliquis, those kind of things. So again, trying to just touch on a couple of items that she's asking about, but not get too far down too many bunny holes.
I challenge you on that. When Dr. Brewer told me, hey, the new anticoagulants can be helpful for these scenarios, not only atrial fibrillation. I didn't believe that. I saw the evidence, and Dr. Brewer has been keeping track of every time that I say I was wrong, you were right. That's
so I know. So let me just make sure that I hear that and understand that. You're saying that you were wrong and I was right?
Well,
I know you hate to say it that way, but I'm just asking.
Keep track of it. It's not going to be more than 10 times. Now, fact Northwest, if you're ticklish in the neck, CIMT can be miserable. Takes about half an hour. Yeah, if you have the tickles, it's going to be a little bit harder. But still, it's doable. What dosage of natto, aged garlic extract, and MK7 do you recommend? I'm on 20 milligrams of lisinopril and 10 milligrams of simvastatin.
So the other thing, I'm down in Athens right now, so I don't have natto. But when I'm in Greenville, I put natto in my coffee, powdered natto, and it's just a tablespoonful. People ask about the brand. I can't read it. It's in kanji. It's a Korean brand that I get off of Amazon. Sorry, I'm not going to be able to give you the dosage other than just a tablespoon of powdered natto in my coffee. MK7, the K2, vitamin K2, which is supposed to be in natto, but there's some question about whether or not it's been removed. I take vitamin K2 separately, and I strongly recommend not the 100 micrograms that you tend to see in these mixed pills with vitamin D3. I recommend 300 to 400 micrograms, and there are places where you can get 45 milligrams, which is 50 to 100 times higher, and it's still safe, and it's been shown to help with osteoporosis as well, not just plaque reversal or plaque stabilization.
Yeah, in regards to natto, if you're taking the pills, go with fiber units. Even 3,600 fiber units have found some evidence. The biggest evidence was found on 10,800 fiber units a day. But anything in between might be helpful too. The aged garlic extract, I don't remember the dosage right now, but it comes in different presentations. But we're exploring the aged garlic extract. Take a look at the Top 7 Foods video. I'm pretty sure Dr. Brewer mentioned that, what the evidence suggests. But usually it's not something like not as regulated as medications, though. So that's kind of the caveat.
If you're looking it up, what you'll tend to see is kyolic garlic. That's the most common form.
Yeah. Now,
and Brad, what you see there is 1 to 300 milligrams. You can see some with 600 milligrams. I just take the 300s.
Good. Thank you for clarifying that, because you're the one who's taking that. I'm not taking anything other than magnesium threonate and some fish oil. Brad, calcium score going up after implementing the lifestyle changes with a low dose statin baby aspirin is actually a good sign. But at the time, I wanted to jump off the ledge until Dr. Brewer explained it. And that's what we're saying
Thank
when we
you,
show you.
Brad.
Thank you, Brad. When we show you the images of the calcium of the calcification of plaque, if any of those cases, passive calcification or active calcification, can increase your calcium score. So what's the difference, or how do you know? You won't be able to tell just with the calcium score. But if you're doing the stuff that Brad is doing, it's very likely that you're doing active calcification, and that's what you can see on a CIMT.
Exactly. CIMTs are the way to tell. Or, as you know, if you want to pay the money, get injected with radioactive stuff and spend a day getting it done. You can do a
CT angiogram
with AI.
with AI. That's important because the traditional CT angiogram, you depend on the cardiologist to give you the report, and a lot of them won't tell you anything about soft plaque. All right, so that's the show for today. If I wasn't able to get to your questions, make sure to bring those before early on the show. I appreciate all of you guys. Remember, subscribe, click the notifications bell, like button, share. If you think somebody is going to be able to use this information and save their lives, share it. If you have somebody that you hate and you want them to waste some time, an hour of their time, share it as well. All of those help. Dr. Brewer, closing remarks before we go?
Just to repeat, now you said we're going to be going back and doing a long form pre-recorded video on this content with a lot more information, right?
That's right.
Like my most recent CIMT.
And your DEXA scans and all a bunch of stuff.
And my DEXA scans.
Probably.
And maybe, are we going to include a couple of clips of me pulling that sled and doing hill sprints?
That's a good idea. We might do that.
Okay.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you so much, guys. See you next week.
Thank you.